Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at RIA taking a look at a Union self-cocking revolver. I'm always really interested in this category of firearms because there are just so few that were ever tried and none of them actually became really successful. There are basically three types of self-cocking revolvers that are out there. The Union, this one, which is the rarest of all of them, the Webley-Fosbery, which is the best known of all of them, and the Matiba, which is, well, the newest of all of them. So, years and years ago, I think 8 or 9 years ago now, I did a video on one of these, and I wanted to repeat it because I have a little bit more that I can show you, and I have a much better camera and lighting now. So, this was manufactured by the Union Firearms Company in Toledo, Ohio, which is a company that made a whole bunch of really oddball, interesting, unusual firearms. So they made these. They made the Revolver Semiauto pistols, which I have a video on, which were, I think, even less successful than these. They made the Union Model 24 shotgun, which is a fascinatingly weird shotgun that Othais over at C&R Arsenal is going to be doing some cool content on. And they also made, well, they made other stuff. They made shotguns for Sears Roebuck. They did a few guns that were a little more conventional, but this is the coolest of them all. So this was patented in 1909. It was designed by Charles Lefever, and if Lefever sounds like a name that is familiar, it's because his father, Daniel Lefever, is the guy behind the Lefever shotgun, which has quite a good reputation in the US and was very nice and very popular. Well, his son worked for him for a while and then went to work for the Union Firearms Company, had a hand in the Revolver design a little bit, and patented this. So let's take a closer look. Let me show you how it works, and we can take it apart. These were available either blued or nickel-plated. This one's nickeled, of course, as are all of the ones that I've actually seen myself. So I suspect that was the more popular option for the people who did buy these. We have a small little marking there on the right side, Union Firearms Company, Toledo, Ohio, Lefever patent. This was patented in 1909. There are no other markings on it except for this serial number on the butt, which is number 40 in this case. They were advertised as coming with red hard rubber grips, but black grips like this are on the ones that I've seen. Now what we have here mechanically is a hybrid. We have a revolver upper assembly, and this looks very similar to something you would get from Hopkins & Allen or Ivor Johnson at the time. And then that has been coupled with a specially designed frame to allow it to turn this into a self-cocking design. So loading and unloading is done just like one of the vintage top break revolvers. You've got a little latch back here, and we have an extractor claw that's going to pop your 5 cases out. It is a 5-shot revolver. It's in .32 Smith & Wesson long, specifically advertised as using standard Smith & Wesson cartridges, so you didn't need anything special, fancy, proprietary. Has a 3-inch barrel, and it has a double-action hammer mechanism. So the idea is you can either cock this and then fire it, or just pull the trigger. And when you fire it, the hammer will drop, bang. Recoil energy is then going to push the barrel assembly back. It recocks the hammer, and then a spring pushes the revolver assembly forward again, which causes the cylinder to rotate into the next position. Now the way the cylinder rotation actually works is we have this stud right down there, and it's fixed in the frame so that when the upper assembly moves backwards, you can see that the cylinder here is going to be running over the top of that little pin. Now that pin is spring-loaded, so you can close this in any position and then rotate it until that pin snaps into one of these grooves. And when you go to cycle the action, what's going to happen is that the pin is going to travel in one of these long grooves, which forces the cylinder to rotate like so, and resets it. The gun looks kind of awkward, but it actually handles reasonably nicely. It just sits relatively high up in the hand because you need this extra space to have the recoil spring and mechanism to make it work. If this were a regular revolver, this whole thing would be ½ an inch lower. This looks funky, but it actually doesn't really get in the way of a grip, and it's not that different from having a shrouded hammer revolver. One last mechanical element to mention is a mechanical safety that Lefever built into this. In fact, it's one of the key elements in his patent, and it's what separates, or one of the things that separates, this from the Webley-Fosbery, which came out only a few years earlier. The safety in there prevents the upper assembly from moving backwards unless the trigger is actually being held down, so that you can't unintentionally cycle the upper and rotate the cylinder to a position that you didn't expect it to be in. So there's a lock in here that holds that, unless I am actually holding the trigger down, in which case it can cycle back and forth. Now I can show you how that works, because to disassemble it, we just have this little knurled spring-loaded pad here, and I pull that down, and I can pull the revolver half right out of the frame. And that little element right above the tip of my finger there is the mechanical safety. So when you pull the trigger, that lever goes down. If it's not down, it's going to hit this ledge on the revolver, the upper assembly, and stop it. Now, it's possible if you jam it really hard, you could probably override that safety, but mechanically that's how it operates. Once it goes down, then there's nothing stopping the upper from moving backwards. Beyond that, you can see we have the little stud pin there that operates the cylinder. And we also have this little spring-loaded hand that acts to lock the cylinder in place when you're firing. And what it does is it runs into one of these tracks when they're oriented right on the bottom of the system like that. That little spring-loaded hand is going to sit in that track and hold the cylinder in place. When this whole thing moves backward, you can see that that track is angled up and this is spring-loaded, and so it's going to push this out of alignment, which will then allow the cylinder to rotate. On this guy, we of course have the recoil spring, because that's necessary to both absorb some of the energy when this cycles backward, and it's necessary to push it forward back into firing position. Got firing pin right there. There's really not much to this. This is essentially the upper half of a very typical sort of revolver. Because we have a hand that's built into the frame, there's no cutout where you would normally expect a hand here. That would also be a hand that would push on the back of the cylinder to rotate it. We don't need that because we've got these operating cams in the side. So there you go, really a pretty simple system, if perhaps more mechanically involved to produce than just a standard revolver would be, especially given the economy of scale that was possible or was being realized with typical revolver designs. Got, of course, the little grooves there that this runs in, so reassembly is just a matter of pushing that back into place. So what does this gain you over, say, a traditional double-action revolver? The answer is not much. Really, the only thing that it gives you is that after your first shot, you have a single-action trigger press, but the cylinder's already been rotated. So it is essentially the same trigger mechanism, or practical trigger mechanism, as a single-action semi-auto. But you could do that with a traditional double-action revolver. You just have a little bit heavier trigger pull in the process. So is that worth the trade-off of the extra weight and perhaps more importantly, expense of this guy? Well, not to most people. A grand total of something like 300 of these were made. By 1912, they were out of production. It was a supremely unsuccessful firearm, and I think that is largely because of its price. We know from a period catalog that this was $10 in 1909 or 1910, and at that time, you could get basically, you could get a revolver version of the top half, you know, a Hopkins and Allen type revolver, or an Iver Johnson even. Iver Johnson is pretty darn good. They've got their Hammer the Hammer safety campaign thing. You could get one of those revolvers for between $3 and $6. For just under $10, you could actually get yourself a Colt 25 ACP semi-auto pistol. And when it comes down to it, like, if you want a concealable quality pocket pistol, do you want this or do you want a 25 ACP Colt designed by John Browning? You want the Colt Browning. So these just didn't sell well, and eventually they stopped bothering, pretty much the same as what happened with the Reef Grobber. So it is really quite scarce to find them on the market today because of how rare they were, but And they're just, all the self-cocking revolvers, just super cool. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, got a better look and a more thorough look at a very cool and very unusual pistol. Thanks for watching.